The small spacecraft descended through the thick amber clouds of 7, its engines humming softly as it landed in a clearing surrounded by towering alien trees. Jacob and Rachel stepped out cautiously, their boots sinking slightly into the damp soil beneath them. The air smelled strange, earthy but metallic, with an undertone of something sweet yet unfamiliar. They exchanged glances before scanning the area carefully. This was uncharted territory, and they had been warned about strange creatures living here. But those warnings were vague, almost like myths meant to scare explorers. Jacob adjusted his backpack, pulling out a scanner to check for any immediate signs of danger. "Anything?" Rachel asked, her voice steady despite the tension in her shoulders. She brushed her hair away from her face and squinted at the dense forest ahead. Shadows moved faintly among the trees, though whether it was caused by wind or movement wasn't clear. "Not yet," Jacob replied, frowning at the device, "but we should stay alert." He pointed toward a patch of disturbed earth near the edge of the clearing. Tiny footprints marked the ground, leading away into the forest. They looked too small to belong to anything dangerous, but curiosity got the better of them. "What do you think made those?" Rachel asked, crouching down to examine the tracks more closely. Each print was no bigger than her palm, with 3 distinct claw marks at the front. Whatever had left them walked on all fours, judging by the pattern. Jacob shrugged. "Could be some kind of animal, maybe it's harmless. Let's follow them, might lead us to water or food." Rachel nodded reluctantly. While she trusted Jacob's judgment, something about this place gave her an uneasy feeling. The forest loomed over them, its towering trees casting long shadows that seemed to stretch endlessly. Strange plants with glowing leaves lined their path, emitting soft clicks and hums whenever they brushed against them. It felt alive, watching them somehow. As they followed the trail deeper into the woods, the atmosphere grew heavier. The sounds of chirping insects, or what passed for insects on this planet, filled the air, mingling with the occasional rustle of leaves. Jacob kept one hand on the holster of his sidearm while Rachel carried a compact tucked into her belt loop. They weren't armed heavily. This mission was supposed to be reconnaissance, not combat. About half an hour later, Jacob stopped abruptly. "Wait," he whispered, holding up a hand. Ahead of them, nestled behind a cluster of bioluminescent bushes, a pair of wide, curious eyes stared back. A small creature, barely larger than a, peeked out cautiously. Its fur shimmered faintly, shifting colors like oil on water, and its oversized ears twitched nervously as it sniffed the air. Is that what made the tracks?" Rachel murmured, taking a step forward. The creature didn't flee but remained frozen, studying them intently. "I think so," Jacob said, lowering his voice. "Careful, we don't want to spook it." But just as Rachel took another step closer, Jacob accidentally bumped into her. His slipped from his belt and clattered loudly onto the ground. The sudden noise startled the creature, which darted forward, snatched the tool in its mouth, and disappeared into the underbrush before either of them could react. Jacob groaned, running a hand through his dark hair. "Great, now what? We need that thing." Rachel sighed, adjusting the strap of her pack. "We'll have to go after it, but let's be careful. We don't know what else is out there." They began tracking the creature again, following the faint disturbances it left behind. Broken twigs, flattened grass, and the occasional glimmer of its reflective fur guided their way. As they pressed on, the forest grew darker, the canopy above thickening until only slivers of light pierced through. The temperature dropped noticeably, sending a chill down Rachel's spine. After nearly 20 minutes of searching, they stumbled upon a massive hollow tree. Soft clicking sounds echoed from within, drawing their attention. Peering inside, they saw the cub-like creature nestled beside a much larger version of itself, a mother. Her sleek fur shimmered even brighter than the cub, and her gaze was piercing yet calm. She didn't seem hostile, only protective. Rachel slowly extended her hand, hopping to retrieve the without startling the animals. "It's okay," she said softly, though she doubted they understood her words. "We just want our tool back." Before she could get any closer, a loud crash came from behind them. Both Jacob and Rachel spun around to see three men emerge from the trees, their faces grim and their rifles raised. Their leader, Daniel, sneered at them. "Thought you hog all the glory, huh? This planet's ours now." Rachel's heart sank. These were scavengers, rogue explorers who cared nothing for protocol or safety. They operated outside the law, claiming whatever resources they could find. And now they had found Jacob and Rachel. "We're not here to compete," Jacob said firmly, stepping protectively in front of Rachel. "This is a scientific mission." Daniel laughed coldly. "Scientific my ass. You two are trespassing on our claim." He gestured to his companions, who spread out to flank them. "Hand over your gear, and maybe we'll let you walk away." The tension in the air was palpable. Rachel glanced nervously at the mother creature, who had begun making low, growling noises. The cub whimpered, retreating further into the hollow tree. "Don't provoke them," Rachel pleaded, keeping her voice low. "They might attack." But Daniel ignored her warning. Raising his rifle, he aimed directly at the mother. "Back off, freaks." The shot rang out before anyone could stop him. The bullet grazed the mother's shoulder, causing her to roar in pain and anger. In an instant, chaos erupted. Dozens of smaller creatures appeared from the shadows, surrounding the intruders. The mother lunged at Daniel, knocking him to the ground. His companions fired wildly, scattering the creatures but doing little to control the situation. In the confusion, Jacob grabbed Rachel's arm. "Run!" he shouted, pulling her deeper into the forest. Behind them, the sounds of gunfire and snarls faded into the distance. They didn't stop running until their lungs burned and their legs threatened to give out. When they finally collapsed against a mossy log, gasping for breath, Rachel turned to Jacob. "What just happened?" He shook his head, still trying to catch his breath. "I don't know, but I think we're in way over our heads." Little did they know, their encounter with the creatures and the mysterious cub was only the beginning of their journey on Seven. Jacob and Rachel stumbled through the dense forest, their hearts pounding as they tried to put as much distance as possible between themselves and the chaos they had left behind. The sounds of gunfire and snarls faded into the distance, replaced by the eerie silence of the alien woods. Their breaths came in ragged gasps, and sweat dripped down their faces despite the cool air. For a moment, they allowed themselves to stop and lean against a mossy log, trying to process what had just happened. "What was that?" Rachel finally asked, her voice trembling. She wiped her forehead with the back of her hand, her blue eyes wide with fear and confusion. "I don't know," Jacob admitted, shaking his head. "But those creatures, they weren't attacking us. They were defending themselves." Rachel nodded slowly, replaying the scene in her mind. The mother creature had lunged at Daniel only after he fired his rifle. The smaller ones had appeared suddenly, almost like an organized response to the threat. It wasn't random aggression. It was calculated, coordinated. "Do you think they'll follow us?" she asked nervously. Jacob glanced around, scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. "I don't think so, but we should keep moving. We're exposed out here." They pushed forward, navigating the uneven terrain with caution. The forest seemed even darker now, the towering trees blocking out most of the light. Strange plants glowed faintly in the gloom, casting an otherworldly hue over everything. Every sound, the rustle of leaves, the distant chirping of unseen creatures, made them jump. After nearly an hour of walking, they found themselves back near the hollow tree where they had first encountered the mother and her cub. To their surprise, the area was eerily quiet. No signs of the scavengers or the creatures remained, save for a few scuffed patches of earth and scattered shell casings. Jacob knelt down to examine one of the casings, turning it over in his fingers. "Looks like they didn't stick around," he muttered. Rachel frowned. "What about the creatures? Do you think they're still nearby?" Before Jacob could answer, a soft clicking noise drew their attention. They turned to see the cub-like creature emerge from the shadows, its shimmering fur catching the dim light. It moved cautiously, stopping a few feet away to study them. In its mouth, it carried something metallic, that Jacob had dropped earlier. "Hey, it has my tool," Jacob exclaimed, taking a step forward. The cub froze, its ears flattening slightly as if unsure whether to flee or stay. "It's okay," Rachel said softly, holding out her hand. "We won't hurt you." Her voice was calm, almost soothing, and the cub tilted its head curiously. After a moment, it crept closer, dropping at their feet before retreating a few paces. Jacob picked up the tool, inspecting it for damage. "Looks fine," he said with a relieved sigh. He glanced at the cub, which was watching them intently. "Thanks, little guy." The cub let out a high-pitched chirp, its tail swishing happily. Then, without warning, it darted off into the underbrush, disappearing from sight. "Well, that was interesting," Rachel said, raising an eyebrow. "Do you think it was trying to help us?" "Maybe," Jacob replied thoughtfully. "Or maybe it just wanted to return what it took earlier. Either way, we should keep moving." They continued their trek, but the encounter with the cub lingered in their minds. Something about the creature's behavior felt deliberate, almost intelligent. As they walked, Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. She kept glancing over her shoulder, half expecting to see glowing eyes peering at them from the shadows. Their unease grew when they stumbled upon another set of tracks, larger this time, with deep claw marks gouged into the soil. These prints were fresh, leading deeper into the forest. Rachel pointed them out to Jacob, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you think that's the mother?" Jacob crouched down to examine the tracks more closely. "Could be, or maybe one of the others we saw earlier. Either way, we should avoid following them." But avoiding the tracks proved impossible. The path they were on seemed to converge with the trail left by the larger creature, forcing them to make a decision: turn back or press on. Neither option felt particularly appealing. Turning back meant retracing their steps and potentially running into the scavengers again, while continuing forward meant risking another confrontation with the creatures. "We'll go slow," Jacob decided, gripping his sidearm tightly. "If we see anything, we retreat." Rachel nodded, though her stomach churned with anxiety. They moved cautiously, sticking close together as they followed the winding trail. The deeper they ventured, the denser the forest became. The trees grew taller, their gnarled roots twisting across the ground like skeletal fingers. The air grew colder, carrying with it a faint musky scent that made Rachel's skin crawl. Then they heard it, a low growl that sent shivers down their spines. They froze, their eyes scanning the darkness ahead. Slowly, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was the mother creature, her sleek fur shimmering faintly in the dim light. Her golden eyes locked onto them, unblinking and intense. Behind her, several smaller cubs peeked out from the underbrush, their movements hesitant yet curious. Rachel instinctively stepped back, her hand brushing against Jacob's arm. "What do we do?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Stay calm," Jacob murmured, keeping his voice steady. "Don't make any sudden moves." The mother creature took a step forward, her growl softening into a low rumble. She sniffed the air, tilting her head as if studying them. The cubs mimicked her movements, their large eyes filled with curiosity. One of them, a smaller version of the cub they had encountered earlier, darted forward, stopping just a few feet away. It sniffed the ground, then looked up at them with an expression that could almost be described as playful. Rachel exhaled slowly, lowering her guard slightly. "They don't seem aggressive," she said quietly. "Do you think they're used to humans?" Jacob shook his head. "Doubt it. This is probably their territory. They might not know what to make of us." The mother let out a sharp bark, and the cubs immediately retreated to her side. She stared at Jacob and Rachel for a long moment before turning and disappearing into the forest. The cubs followed her, vanishing into the shadows just as quickly. "Well, that was anticlimactic," Rachel said, letting out a shaky laugh. "Do you think we're safe now?" "For now," Jacob replied, though his tone was cautious. "But we should keep moving. Let's find a place to set up camp before nightfall." They pressed on, eventually finding a small clearing surrounded by thick bushes. It wasn't ideal, but it offered some protection from the elements. As they began unpacking their supplies, Rachel noticed something odd, a faint clicking sound coming from the bushes. She turned sharply, her heart racing. "What is it?" Jacob asked, reaching for his sidearm. Rachel hesitated, then relaxed slightly when she saw the source of the noise. It was the cub again, peeking out from behind a cluster of glowing plants. It held something in its mouth, a piece of fabric torn from what looked like Daniel's jacket. "Oh no," Rachel whispered, her face pale. "Is that?" Jacob approached cautiously, kneeling down to get a better look. Sure enough, the fabric bore the insignia of the scavenger's crew. "It looks like they didn't make it," he said grimly. The cub dropped the fabric at their feet, chirping excitedly as if expecting praise. Rachel stared at it, her mind racing. "Do you think it hunted them?" Jacob frowned, glancing at the cub. "It's possible. Those creatures are predators, but why would it bring us this?" Rachel shook her head, unable to answer. The implications were unsettling. If the creatures viewed humans as prey, what did that mean for their survival? And why had the cub brought them evidence of the scavenger's demise? As night fell, Jacob and Rachel huddled together near their makeshift fire, the cub lingering nearby. It seemed content to watch them, occasionally letting out a soft chirp or bringing them shiny objects it found in the bushes. Despite their initial fear, they couldn't help but feel a strange sense of connection with the creature. It was clear that it viewed them differently than the scavengers, but how exactly remained a mystery. For now, they focused on surviving the night. The forest was alive with sounds, chirps, growls, and distant roars that hinted at larger predators lurking in the shadows. Every noise made them tense, their hands clutching weapons tightly. But as the hours passed, the presence of the cub provided a small measure of comfort. Whatever its intentions, it seemed to view them as allies, or at least not enemies. By morning, Jacob and Rachel knew one thing for certain. Their journey on Seven was far from over. The creatures, the scavengers, and the planet itself all posed threats they couldn't fully comprehend. Yet amidst the danger, there was also a glimmer of hope. The cub's actions suggested intelligence, and perhaps even a desire to communicate. Whether that would lead to salvation or further peril remained to be seen. The next morning, Jacob and Rachel woke to a strange sensation, a low hum that seemed to vibrate through the ground beneath them. At first, they thought it was another alien creature or perhaps some natural phenomenon unique to Seven. But as they opened their eyes and looked around, they realized the source of the sound was much closer than they expected. Dozens of glowing eyes surrounded their small clearing, reflecting the faint light of dawn. The creatures had returned. Rachel sat up quickly, her heart pounding. "Jacob," she whispered urgently, nudging him awake. He blinked groggily, then froze when he saw the encircling figures. The mother creature stood at the forefront, her shimmering fur catching the early sunlight. Behind her, several smaller cubs peered out curiously, their movements cautious but deliberate. "What do they want?" Rachel asked softly, clutching a small knife she had kept close during the night. Her voice trembled slightly, though she tried to remain calm. Jacob shook his head, his brow furrowed in thought. "I don't know, but we're outnumbered. Let's not make any sudden moves." The mother let out a low growl, her gaze fixed on them. She took a step forward, her claws scraping against the damp soil. The cubs followed suit, fanning out to form a loose circle around Jacob and Rachel. It wasn't aggressive, not yet, but the message was clear. They were not free to leave. "Do you think they're going to attack us?" Rachel asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't think so," Jacob replied. "If they wanted to hurt us, they would have done it already." The mother tilted her head, studying them intently. Then, with a sharp bark, she turned and began walking back into the forest. The cubs hesitated for a moment before following her, leaving Jacob and Rachel alone in the clearing. For a brief second, they wondered if they were being given a chance to escape. But just as they considered making a run for it, the mother stopped and looked back, her golden eyes locking onto theirs. "She wants us to follow her," Jacob said, standing slowly. "We don't have a choice." Rachel hesitated, gripping her knife tightly. "What if it's a trap?" "It might be," Jacob admitted. "But staying here isn't an option either. We need to see where this leads." Reluctantly, Rachel nodded, and together they began following the creatures deeper into the forest. The path twisted and turned, leading them through dense thickets and over rocky terrain. The air grew cooler, and the trees became even taller, their gnarled branches intertwining high above to form a canopy that blocked out most of the light. Strange sounds echoed around them, chirps, clicks, and distant roars, but none of them came from the creatures guiding them. After nearly an hour of walking, they arrived at a massive hollow tree. Its entrance was wide enough for several humans to walk through side by side, and inside the space was surprisingly spacious. The walls glowed faintly, illuminated by bioluminescent moss that clung to the bark. In the center of the chamber, flat stones were arranged in neat rows, each one bearing strange objects, scraps of metal, shards of glass, and other unidentifiable items. "What is this place?" Rachel whispered, her eyes wide with awe. "I think it's their den," Jacob replied, his voice low. "Look at those stones, they're like displays." Rachel stepped closer to examine one of the stones. On it lay a human finger, still wearing a ring engraved with the scavenger's insignia. Beside it was a boot, its sole scorched and cracked. Her stomach churned as she realized what she was looking at. "These are trophies," she said, her voice trembling. They hunt things and bring back pieces as trophies." Jacob nodded grimly. "It makes sense. That cub brought us Daniel's jacket last night. This must be how they honor their prey." The realization hit them both like a punch to the gut. If the creatures viewed humans as worthy adversaries, what did that mean for them? Were they next? Before they could dwell on the thought, the mother creature appeared beside them, her presence commanding. She let out a series of clicks and growls, tilting her head as if waiting for a response. Jacob and Rachel exchanged uneasy glances. "She's trying to communicate," Rachel said softly. "Maybe we should try responding." Jacob cleared his throat and mimicked one of the clicks, his tone hesitant. To their surprise, the mother tilted her head again, then repeated the sound. Encouraged, Jacob tried another click, and once again the mother responded. It was slow and awkward, but it felt like progress. "They're intelligent," Rachel murmured, watching the exchange. "More intelligent than we thought." Over the next few days, Jacob and Rachel found themselves adapting to life among the creatures. They weren't exactly prisoners, but neither were they free to leave. The mother kept a close eye on them, her demeanor protective rather than hostile. The cubs, especially the one they had encountered earlier, grew fond of them, often bringing them shiny objects or bits of food scavenged from the forest. Rachel spent much of her time observing the creatures' behavior. She noticed patterns in their communication. Certain clicks corresponded to specific actions, while others seemed to convey emotions. With patience, she began teaching them simple words in English, pointing to objects and repeating their names. The mother creature, in particular, showed a keen interest in learning. She would mimic Rachel's words, her deep growls blending strangely with the human language. Jacob focused on understanding their hunting rituals. He watched as the cubs practiced stalking imaginary prey, their movements fluid and precise. The mother supervised these exercises, correcting mistakes with gentle nudges or soft growls. When a successful kill was made, even if it was just a fallen branch, the cub responsible would proudly present it to the mother, who would inspect it carefully before placing it on one of the display stones. "They're teaching them how to hunt," Jacob explained to Rachel one evening as they sat near the fire. "But it's more than that. It's about respect. By displaying parts of their prey, they're honoring its strength." Rachel nodded thoughtfully. "It's fascinating and terrifying. If they see us as prey, why haven't they attacked us yet?" "Maybe because we fought back," Jacob suggested. "Or maybe because of the cub, it seems to like us." Indeed, the cub had become a constant companion, often curling up beside Rachel as she worked on her makeshift notes. It would chirp excitedly whenever she praised it, wagging its tail like a dog. Despite everything, Rachel couldn't help but feel a bond forming between them. As the days turned into weeks, Jacob and Rachel began to understand the creature's social structure. The mother was clearly the leader, respected and obeyed by all. The cubs deferred to her authority but also played freely among themselves, their interactions playful yet disciplined. The adults hunted in pairs, coordinating their movements with remarkable precision. And always there was the ritual of displaying trophies, a practice that seemed central to their culture. Despite their growing understanding, questions lingered. Why had the creatures spared them? What role did the cub play in all of this? And most importantly, how long would they remain safe? One evening, as Rachel sat sketching the creatures in her notebook, the mother approached her, carrying something in her mouth. It was a fragment of their spacecraft's control panel, its edges scorched but otherwise intact. Rachel stared at it in disbelief. "Where did she find this?" she asked Jacob, who had joined her. He frowned, examining the piece closely. "It looks like part of our beacon. Maybe she found it after the crash." The mother dropped the fragment at Rachel's feet, letting out a series of clicks. Rachel hesitated, then picked it up, turning it over in her hands. "Do you think she's trying to help us repair it?" "It's possible," Jacob said slowly. "Or maybe she's testing us to see if we'll use it to leave." The implications weighed heavily on them. If the creatures were helping them repair their ship, did that mean they were being released or driven away? Either way, the decision wouldn't be easy. They had grown accustomed to their new life, however strange and dangerous it was. Leaving meant returning to a world that felt increasingly distant, while staying meant accepting their place in the creatures' world. For now, they decided to focus on survival. Each day brought new challenges, but also new discoveries. The bond with the cub deepened, and their understanding of the creature's language improved. Yet the question of their future loomed large, casting a shadow over every interaction. Whatever happened next, one thing was certain: their lives had changed forever. The creatures of Seven had shown them a world unlike anything they had ever known, a world where survival depended not just on strength, but on respect, intelligence, and adaptability. Whether they would thrive or perish remained to be seen. Weeks had passed since Jacob and Rachel first arrived in the creature's den, and their lives had taken on a strange rhythm. Each day began with the soft glow of bioluminescent moss lighting up the hollow tree, followed by the low hum of clicks and growls as the creatures communicated among themselves. The mother creature remained watchful but less imposing now, her golden eyes often following Jacob and Rachel as they went about their tasks. The cubs, especially the one that had grown so fond of them, treated the humans almost like part of their pack. Rachel spent most of her time trying to bridge the gap between their two species. She had started teaching the mother creature simple words: tree, water, food, and was amazed at how quickly the creature picked them up. At first, it was just mimicry, the deep rumble of the creature's voice blending awkwardly with Rachel's softer tones. But over time, the mother began using the words in context, pointing to objects or making requests. It was slow progress, but every small success filled Rachel with hope. Jacob, on the other hand, focused on understanding the creatures' hunting rituals. He observed how the adults worked together, their movements fluid and precise. They relied on sound as much as sight, using subtle clicks to coordinate attacks. When a successful hunt ended, the cubs would bring back pieces of the prey to the mother, who inspected them carefully before placing them on the display stones. These trophies weren't just random objects. They were symbols of respect for the strength and cunning of their prey. One evening, as Rachel sat cross-legged on the damp soil, sketching the creatures in her notebook, the cub approached her, chirping excitedly. In its mouth, it carried a shiny object, a fragment of metal from the scavenger's gear. Rachel smiled faintly, reaching out to take it. "You're always bringing me things," she said softly, scratching the cub behind its ears. It purred contentedly, curling up beside her. Jacob joined her a moment later, holding a piece of glowing moss he had been examining. "I think I'm starting to understand why they brought us here," he said, his voice thoughtful. "It's not just because we fought back. They see us as equals in a way." Rachel raised an eyebrow. "Equals? How do you figure that?" He gestured to the display stones nearby, where fragments of human belongings were mounted alongside pieces of alien animals. "Look at those trophies. They don't just collect anything. They choose things that represent strength or intelligence. Our tools, our weapons, they're proof that we're capable hunters too." Rachel frowned, turning the idea over in her mind. "So they respect us because they think we're like them." "Exactly," Jacob replied. "But it's more than that. Think about how the cub acts around us. It doesn't see us as prey, it sees us as part of its family. Maybe that's why the mother hasn't hurt us." The thought sent a shiver down Rachel's spine. If the creatures truly viewed them as equals, or even family, what did that mean for their future? Were they meant to stay here forever, living among these alien beings? Or was there still a chance to escape? Their musings were interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching the den. Both Jacob and Rachel tensed, their hands instinctively reaching for their makeshift weapons. But when the source of the noise emerged from the shadows, it wasn't a threat. It was the mother creature, carrying something large and metallic in her jaws. She dropped it at their feet with a soft thud, then stepped back, watching them expectantly. Rachel knelt down to examine the object. It was a piece of their spacecraft's control panel, the same fragment the mother had brought days earlier, but now it was slightly different. Small wires had been reconnected, and parts of the circuitry appeared repaired. "She fixed it," Jacob said, his voice tinged with disbelief. He picked up the panel, inspecting it closely. "This could be enough to send a signal, maybe even call for rescue." Rachel stared at him, her heart racing. "Do you think she knows what it is?" Jacob hesitated. "I don't know, but she must have figured out it's important to us." The implications weighed heavily on them. If the mother creature was helping them repair their equipment, did that mean she wanted them to leave? Or was this another test, to see if they would use the opportunity to abandon her and her cubs? For hours, they debated what to do. On one hand, repairing the beacon offered a chance to return home, to safety and familiarity. On the other hand, leaving meant turning their backs on everything they had learned, and everything the creatures had shared with them. "We can't ignore this," Jacob finally said, breaking the silence. "If we can fix the beacon, we owe it to ourselves to try." Rachel nodded reluctantly. "But what about them? What happens to the creatures if we leave?" "They'll survive," Jacob replied firmly. "They've been here long before we arrived, and they'll be here long after we're gone. We're guests here, Rachel, not prisoners." Despite his words, Rachel couldn't shake the feeling of guilt. The cub had grown so attached to her, often following her everywhere and chirping happily whenever she praised it. The mother creature had shown them kindness, even if it was rooted in respect rather than affection. Leaving felt like betrayal. Over the next few days, Jacob and Rachel worked tirelessly to repair the beacon. The mother creature watched them closely, occasionally nudging tools toward them or making soft clicking noises that seemed almost encouraging. The cubs played nearby, their antics providing a welcome distraction from the weight of their task. As they pieced the device together, Rachel found herself talking to the creatures more often. She pointed to objects and repeated their names, smiling when the mother mimicked her words. The cub, ever curious, would mimic the sounds too, its high-pitched chirps blending strangely with the deeper growls of its mother. It was a clumsy form of communication, but it worked. One afternoon, as Rachel sat teaching the mother the word sky, she noticed the creature staring at her intently. Its head tilted slightly, as if studying her face. Then, to her astonishment, it let out a series of clicks that sounded eerily similar to her name. Ra. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. "Did you just say my name?" The mother repeated the clicks, slower this time. Ra. Tears welled up in Rachel's eyes as she reached out tentatively, placing a hand on the creature's shoulder. "Yes," she whispered. "That's me, Rachel." The moment felt monumental, a breakthrough in their fragile connection. Jacob looked up from his work, his expression softening as he realized what had happened. "She's learning," he said quietly, "faster than we thought possible." By the end of the week, the beacon was nearly complete. Jacob tested it repeatedly, adjusting wires and recalibrating settings until he was confident it would work. All that remained was to activate it and wait for a response. That night, as they prepared to send the signal, the forest seemed unusually quiet. Even the chirping insects and distant roars had fallen silent, as if holding their breath along with Jacob and Rachel. The mother creature stood nearby, her posture relaxed but alert. The cubs huddled close to her, their wide eyes reflecting the faint glow of the bioluminescent moss. "Are you ready?" Jacob asked, glancing at Rachel. She hesitated, looking at the creatures one last time. The cub let out a soft chirp, tilting its head as if sensing her hesitation. Finally, she nodded. "Let's do it." Jacob pressed the activation button and the beacon sprang to life, emitting a steady pulse of light and sound. The signal shot into the sky, invisible to the naked eye but powerful enough to reach any passing ships. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, far above the canopy, a faint hum echoed through the air, a ship descending toward them. "It worked," Jacob said, his voice filled with relief. "We're going home." But as the ship grew closer, Rachel's heart sank. The cub whimpered softly, pressing itself against her leg. The mother creature let out a low growl, her gaze fixed on the approaching vessel. There was no aggression in her stance, only sadness. "We can't just leave them," Rachel said suddenly, her voice trembling. "Not like this." Jacob turned to her, his expression conflicted. "Rachel, we don't have a choice. This is our way out." "But what about them?" she insisted, gesturing to the creatures. "What happens to them once we're gone? Will they forget about us? Will they think we abandoned them?" Jacob sighed, running a hand through his hair. "We gave them a chance to communicate with us, to learn from us. That has to count for something." As the ship landed in the clearing outside the den, Rachel knelt down to hug the cub tightly. It chirped softly, nuzzling against her chest. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, "I'm sorry. I wish we could stay." The mother creature stepped forward, placing a gentle paw on Rachel's shoulder. Her golden eyes met Rachel's, filled with a mixture of pride and understanding. Then, without another sound, she turned and led her cubs deeper into the forest, disappearing into the shadows. Jacob placed a comforting hand on Rachel's arm. "Come on, let's go." Reluctantly, Rachel stood, casting one final glance at the empty den. As they boarded the ship, the hum of its engines drowned out the sounds of the forest. But as they ascended into the sky, Rachel couldn't help but feel that part of her had been left behind. Looking out the window, she spotted a flicker of movement near the hollow tree. The mother creature emerged briefly, watching the ship rise higher and higher. Beside her, the cub let out a single, mournful chirp before retreating into the safety of the forest. And as the planet faded into the distance, Rachel whispered, "Maybe we'll come back someday." The rescue ship ascended higher and higher, leaving the amber clouds of 7 behind. Jacob and Rachel sat side by side in the cramped cabin, their bodies weary but their minds restless. The hum of the engines was steady, a comforting sound that reminded them they were no longer stranded on an alien planet. Yet neither of them felt truly at ease. Rachel stared out the small porthole, her blue eyes reflecting the vastness of space. She couldn't stop thinking about the creatures, the mother, the cubs, and especially the cub that had grown so attached to her. Its chirp still echoed in her mind, soft and playful, like a melody she wished she could replay forever. "Do you think they'll be okay?" she asked quietly, breaking the silence. Jacob glanced at her, his expression thoughtful. "They've survived for who knows how long without us. They'll be fine." "But what if they're not?" Rachel pressed, turning to face him. Her voice trembled slightly, betraying the emotions she'd been holding back. What if we left too soon? What if they needed more time to learn from us? Jacob sighed, leaning back in his seat. Rachel, we did everything we could. We taught them words, showed them how to use tools, even helped them understand parts of our world. But staying longer wouldn't have changed anything. They're intelligent, more than we gave them credit for. They'll adapt. Rachel nodded slowly, though doubt lingered in her heart. She knew Jacob was right. They couldn't stay forever. But that didn't make leaving any easier. Every moment aboard the ship felt heavier, as if the weight of their decision was pressing down on her chest. Hours passed in quiet reflection. The crew of the rescue ship kept mostly to themselves, occasionally checking on Jacob and Rachel to ensure they were comfortable. Food and water were provided, but neither of them ate much. Their thoughts were consumed by the life they had left behind, the glowing moss, the clicking sounds of the creature's language, and the bond they had formed with beings so different yet strangely familiar. As night fell aboard the ship, Rachel found herself unable to sleep. She wandered to the observation deck, a small room with a wide window that offered a breathtaking view of the stars. She stood there, gazing out into the endless expanse of space, when something caught her eye, a faint glimmer on the horizon. At first, she thought it was just another star, but then she realized it wasn't moving like the others. It was growing brighter, closer. Jacob, she called softly, motioning for him to join her. He came quickly, his brow furrowing as he followed her gaze. Together, they watched as a small object drifted nearer to the ship. It wasn't a meteor or debris. It was unmistakably artificial. "What is that?" Jacob muttered, squinting at the object. Before either of them could answer, the ship's communication system crackled to life. A robotic voice announced, "Unknown vessel approaching. Please stand by for identification." Moments later, the object came into clear view. It was a small probe, its surface covered in strange markings that glowed faintly in the darkness. Attached to it was a message written in symbols neither Jacob nor Rachel recognized. But one symbol stood out. It was a crude drawing of the cub-like creature, its oversized ears and shimmering fur unmistakable. "They sent us a message," Rachel whispered, her voice filled with awe. "But how?" Jacob shook his head, equally stunned. "I don't know, but this changes everything." The crew retrieved the probe and brought it inside for analysis. As they examined it, Rachel noticed something tucked beneath the markings, a fragment of metal. It was part of their spacecraft's control panel, the same piece the mother creature had helped repair. Alongside it was a small plaque made of stone, polished smooth and engraved with symbols that resembled the ones used by the creatures in their displays. Rachel traced her fingers over the plaque, her heart pounding. "This isn't just a message," she said softly. "It's a gift." Jacob leaned closer, studying the engraving. "Look here, it's the word Rachel. And this one, it looks like your name." Tears welled up in Rachel's eyes as she realized what it meant. The creatures hadn't forgotten them. They had learned enough of their language to leave a lasting impression, and they wanted Jacob and Rachel to know they were remembered. The captain of the rescue ship approached them, holding a tablet displaying the translated message. "We've decoded it," he said, his tone serious. "It says, 'Thank you, you are strong, you are family.'" Rachel's knees nearly buckled under the weight of emotion. She clutched the plaque tightly, her hands trembling. "They see us as family," she murmured, her voice breaking. "Even after we left." Jacob placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Maybe leaving wasn't goodbye after all. Maybe it was just until next time. For the rest of the journey, Rachel and Jacob debated their future. The probe had reignited something in them, a desire to return, to continue the connection they had started. They had left Seven believing they were abandoning the creatures, but now they understood differently. The creatures had accepted them, honored them, and sent them off with a token of respect. When the ship finally docked at the nearest human outpost, Jacob and Rachel were greeted by officials eager to debrief them. They recounted their story, describing the creatures' intelligence, their hunting rituals, and the deep bond they had formed. Some listened skeptically, dismissing the creatures as mere animals. Others, however, saw the value in what Jacob and Rachel shared, the potential for peaceful coexistence between humans and alien life. "We can't ignore this," Rachel argued passionately during one meeting. "These creatures aren't just predators. They're intelligent, communicative, and capable of forming relationships. If we turn our backs on them, we're missing an opportunity to learn to grow." Her words resonated with some of the scientists present, who began advocating for further exploration of Seven. Plans were drawn up for a research mission, one focused not on resource extraction, but on understanding the planet's inhabitants. Jacob and Rachel volunteered immediately, knowing they had unfinished business. Months passed before the mission was approved. During that time, Rachel kept the plaque close, often running her fingers over the engraved symbols. It became a reminder of the bond they had forged and the promise they had made, not just to the creatures, but to themselves. Finally, the day came when they boarded another ship bound for Seven. This time, they weren't alone. A team of researchers, linguists, and biologists accompanied them, all eager to study the creatures and their way of life. As the planet came into view once more, Rachel felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. Had the creatures moved on? Would they remember? The landing site was near the hollow tree where they had spent so many weeks. As they stepped onto the damp soil, the air smelled just as earthy and metallic as before. The forest loomed ahead, its towering trees casting long shadows. For a moment, everything seemed eerily quiet. Then, a soft clicking noise broke the silence. From the underbrush emerged the cub, now larger and more confident. Its shimmering fur caught the light as it bounded toward them, chirping happily. Behind it came the mother creature, her golden eyes locking onto Rachel and Jacob with unmistakable recognition. Rachel dropped to her knees, tears streaming down her face as the cub leapt into her arms. She hugged it tightly, laughing through her sobs. "You remembered," she whispered. "You really remembered." The mother let out a low growl, tilting her head as if studying them. Then, to everyone's surprise, she repeated the clicks they had taught her months earlier. "Ra." The entire team watched in stunned silence as the creatures welcomed them back. Over the following days, they worked together, building trust and deepening their understanding of each other. The plaque Rachel had kept was returned to the creatures, mounted proudly alongside their other trophies, a symbol of the bond they had formed. In the end, Jacob and Rachel realized their journey wasn't about escape or acceptance. It was about connection. The creatures of Seven had shown them a new way of seeing the world, one rooted in respect, curiosity, and mutual understanding. And as they settled into their new roles as ambassadors between species, they knew they had found something rare and precious, a second chance to belong.